Hi guys, so promises made by the likes of Boris Johnson and other Brexiteers before the 2016 referendum and following it about how the UK would be able to have a much cleaner environment if voters backed leaving the European Union have been proven to be lies once again. Now the government has basically legalised the dumping of raw sewage into Britain's rivers and lakes by defeating an amendment sent to them by the House of Lords, which would have seen water companies financially liable for effluent levels. Now, singer and environmental campaigner Fergal Sharkey was interviewed on BBC Radio about this, and he explained how it has been both a failure of government and a failure of these companies to deal with the problem. All the while, these for-profit organisations are making sure that their shareholders are protected over the environment.
Why do you think this issue is so important?
Well, the simple truth of the matter is, particularly as we are now a week away from COP26 and as a nation lecturing the rest of the planet on climate change and the environment, yet the reality is there is not a single river in England that meets good overall environmental health. Every single river is polluted, and one of the biggest causes of that pollution is in fact the water industry. And by way of example, we now know last year water companies spent over 1.5 million hours dumping sewage into England's rivers on over 400,000 separate occasions.
Now, the government agrees with you on the problem. They say the amount of sewage discharged by water companies into our rivers isn't acceptable. They say they've made it crystal clear to water companies that they must reduce these sewage discharges from storm overflows as a priority.
Well, what government failed to acknowledge and in fact have grappled with, the simple truth is over the last 30 years, water companies have paid out over £60 billion in dividends to their shareholders.
£60 billion to shareholders. These water companies, these private organisations. Now, these companies will say, I'm sorry, we don't have the money to invest in the infrastructure to deal with this problem. So because we don't have the money, we need to dump this into the waterways. We need to dump sewage into the waterways. That's not acceptable. These companies should not be making profits if they're destroying the environment.
Well, filling our rivers full of sewage. The truth is, what we're looking at is the result of a massive underinvestment in infrastructure for the last 30 years and a complete failure of the oversight and regulation of the industry by Ofwat, the Environment Agency, and indeed government itself.
What he's talking about here, of course, is oversight. And what happens is when the UK was a member of the European Union would say, you need to impose these standards. If the UK did not impose the standards, it would receive a fine from Brussels. Now, these fines should have been passed on to these companies, but they were not. So these companies are free to act as they want. Now that the UK is no longer a member of the European Union, these companies are even freer to act as they want because the government is not going to impose any fines or any restrictions upon them.
That's what's at the heart of this issue.
But what the government argues is that if you tried to eliminate the overflow altogether, it could cost anything from between £150 billion to £600 billion.
Martha, I'm afraid that from my own experience in the commercial world, when someone suggests they have an approximate estimate between 150 and 660 billion, what they're actually acknowledging is A, they don't know what the answer is, and B, the reality here is what is needed is for government to simply enforce the existing legislation as it stands, and more importantly, I think as Deborah Meaden pointed out yesterday, is simply to have a conversation on how we're going to get this fixed, create a schedule and a timetable and a plan, and make sure delivery of that plan is directly correlated and connected to dividend payments and executive bonuses.
Exactly. Connected to dividend payments and executive bonuses. Because these companies are making a profit at the moment. And it seems that if you were to impose a fine upon them for dumping this raw sewage into waterways, the fine is less than the profit of doing it. That's why the CEO is still in their job. The CEO has proven, look, the fine is less than the cost of actually cleaning up our act. If the fine is less, then they're just going to pay the fine. But at the moment, the government aren't even imposing a fine. what I've said before in regards to the things like this is that these people, the CEO who's responsible for this, should not be fined. The company should not be fined. The CEO should be in prison. Because if you or I were to redirect our bathroom, our toilet, into the street or into a park or into a river, we would be arrested. Why is that not happening to these companies, the CEOs of these companies? They should be arrested. They should be put in prison. If they were being put in prison, they may be more likely to clean up their act. If there's a fine to be paid and the fine is less than the profit of taking bad action, then they're going to pay the fine. Now, there seems to be a Brexit angle here. Many of these companies are in need of chemicals to treat the water. They can't get the chemicals because of Brexit, because they can't get the heavy goods vehicle drivers to deliver the chemicals they need. In some cases, the chemicals are not available because they can't be imported. They can't get enough of them imported. Some of them aren't available because the factories that produce them don't have the staff, or they have problems obtaining raw materials as well. But the solution here is to enforce the rules. Companies that do not respect the rules should be fined at least, and those companies, I believe, the CEOs, the directors of these companies, should be put in prison because they're destroying the environment. They're destroying the future of this planet for profit. These companies, if they continue in this way, they should be told, we're going to nationalize your companies. That would guarantee that these companies would clean up their act. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.